Inhabitants of the 7 moons of Dolban used to be spread across the planet in different factions. A planet-wide cataclysm known as the Fall forced the inhabitants to flee and resettle on the moons nearly 200 years ago. The Fall. The civilizations of Dolban had areas of metropolitan cooperation and isolated, tribalistic enclaves. Warring between nations was common and uneventful. Border lines shifted, ebbed and flowed, but the core location of each faction scarcely changed. The realm of men was called Manek, where kings and queens reigned over low-lying plains in the south. The Elvish faction, Elvain, was nestled in a dense forest between 2 mountains, where the Elder Tree housed their society. The Evo faction in the eastern deserts consisted of the ancient 3 Kreen, an insectoid race that has existed on Dolban since its creation. Zerly Good was a mixed faction of lizard folk, frogmen, and other amphibious races that lived in the lush forest to the west. Kel was the name of the allied Gnomish and Dwarven faction, where tools and weapons were manufactured with blazing complexity and beauty in the frigid north. Finally, the Magluma faction in the northwest was the planet's melting pot society, where races from all over Dolban found a rough but stable home. The stability came to an end around 1057, after a pernicious demon named Xanon completed his century-long plan to tear the world apart. The arrival of the asteroid. During the preceding decades, Xanon planted spies and sycophants into positions of power in the 6 main nations, where they sat in wait while he spent almost 50 years summoning a distant asteroid to the planet. The asteroid was made almost entirely of asterium, a powerful substance formed in the cosmic debris fields of supernovae and known as the source of magic in the universe. As the asteroid approached, it was visible for over a decade and appeared much larger in the sky than it actually was. During this time, Xanon's disciples ensured that every level of society was concerned with its approach. They grasped at every vague prophecy, every calculated Gnomish or Dwarven insight, and every divine signal to ensure each nation was wholly absorbed with what the asteroid meant to their people. As the asteroid neared, the tension on the planet was at a fever pitch. Scholars, diviners, and soothsayers were split on what it meant and which nations would benefit. Xanon's work was already half complete. An already fractious world waited with snarling teeth at the arrival of the asteroid, only to find that it broke up anticlimactically in the atmosphere, separating a faint mist in 6 large fragments across the world. Now, even the slobbering drunks living on the street understood the significance of 6 fragments. And almost suspiciously, a fragment landed in each of the 6 nations. The might of a nation. Each nation recovered their fragment, quickly capitalized on the event to galvanize their people for war. Xanon's spies, who barely needed to suggest building weapons with the concentrated asterium, whispered in the ears of kings and military commanders, enough to get each nation to concentrate their portions into a single object. The Manic fashioned theirs into a massive blade, to be wielded by the greatest warrior in the kingdom. The Elvain forged theirs into a necklace that was said to grant the wearer the ability to influence the minds of others. The Evo people used their Asterium to build an advanced device capable of breeding more powerful soldiers. The Zerly Good Nation chose not to imbue any terrestrial object the Asterium, and instead chose to bury it deep within the central oasis of their homeland, to infuse all the people with its power. The Terkel faction used their technological prowess to create an indestructible shield, imbued with the faith of the nation to serve only the most worthy of defenders. The Maglama nation chose to infuse a gauntlet with the power of creation, rumored to be able to create crops, buildings, and other items for the benefit of the people. Last War of Dolban. As the war began, each nation was fixated on the role that their Asterium object would play. However, it was the fine misting of Asterium across the whole planet that truly brought forth the chaos that Xenon had hoped for. All matter of living and non-living material was randomly infused with magic power. Building foundations rebelled against their structures, oceans teemed with new horrors, and the already warring planet succumbed to total bedlam. The Exodus. The Maglama and Terkel factions predicted and observed the effects earlier than most, which bought them time to evacuate the majority of their populations to the mostly uninhabited moons. The Zerly Good and Evo factions stubbornly ignored the truth for longer, costing them scores of citizens in the wars and the ensuing chaos. The Elvan Manic factions, worst of all, fought to nearly the last man before facing the inevitable evacuation. As the final groups departed, they could only mourn both their societies and their planet as they watched its surface consumed with pure chaos. The First Lunar Coalition. A coalition of the early Maglama and Terkel leaders quickly established a peaceful accord for the moons. With their numbers mostly intact, they found it easy to impose the new system on the laggard factions who followed. Both factions were far more accustomed to mixed societies, and while they did not punish the latecomers, they knew to not fully trust them with true political power. The United Lunar Coalition is run by a council of gnomes, dwarves, and elected representatives from the Maglama faction. The Zerly Good, the Evo, the Manic, and the Ilvan remnants and descendants are full citizens of the kingdom, but are barred from holding certain political positions. The Seven Moons. The Moon of Wiswin is where the seat of government was placed, and with it, the main commercial hub for all of the moons. The nearly identical moon, Jeswin, became a natural location for the wealthy and powerful, and those who serve them to live. Over the generations, each moon found its place in the ecosystem. Fabrica is the industrial hub, while Gort is the agricultural center. Quota, the only liquid-dominant moon, became the natural and uncontested home of the waterborne races who fled Dolban. Jopek became the residence of a variety of the Zerligun of factions. Quata and Jopek have diplomatic relations with the other moons, but tried to keep to themselves. Finally, Hirad is the warrior training moon, mostly inhabited by various militaries and mercenary guilds from each moon. The proximity to Dolban makes training more effective than on the other moons, and thus the moon is very carefully divided politically to ensure access from each new faction. To centuries of silence. Wiswin scholars have recorded 188 revolutions since the cataclysm, and for almost 2 centuries, the planet has been abandoned. Short-lived incursions by the combined military, The United Lunar Forces have yielded several temporary military bases over the decades. The ferocious reality on the ground of Dolban has shown that only the pooled resources and power of the military can sustain a permanent settlement. Thousands of scavenger, raider, and mercenary groups have vanished over the centuries as they tried their luck on the surface. The ambient effect of the distributed Asterium mist on the surface disrupts planar and teleportation magic. That was, until recently, Transmo. Mastered gnomish artificers have developed a device called a Transmo, which connects to large installations on the moons to transport small groups of people instantly. This invention has finally allowed groups to more easily get to Dolban, but more importantly to return. The design had to be especially tuned to counteract the interference from the Asterium mist. A return to Dolban. The United Lunar Forces has been tasked with regulating Transmo travel to Dolban, but the proverbial cat is now out of the bag. A variety of well-funded mercenary groups, criminal organizations, and research organizations have begun a mad dash to scour the surface for untold treasures and wealth left abandoned during the Exodus.